Thank you, Dr. Wadhwani and Dr. Chaudhary. Uh, Distinguished participants for this professional development course, eminent luminaries in the field of occupational health. It has been my pleasure to be part of this PDC and talk to you on competency development in the context of occupational health. And at the outset, let me also express my gratitude towards the organizers and particularly Dr. Pingre actually, who has been very instrumental in getting me here. So thank you so much. What I would do is that next few minutes would share some thoughts in the context of the competency frameworks for the occupational health. And this is one of the areas where we have been closely working globally also as a larger part of health professional education and how critical it is important for the 21st century health professionals that our academic programs are driven by the competency approaches. Our work responsibilities also are correlated through the competency frameworks. In that context, I framed the today's talk as in talking to in different aspects of that. What I would do is that we'll first focus on the current scenario of occupational health force, both in terms of numbers and looking at also the quality. Then dealing with some of the issues related to what does it mean actually when we all say that competence and performance and competency, so what does it mean? And looking from the educational lens that what competencies all relates to. And then bringing the whole philosophy of that competency frameworks uh, in relationship with the occupational health. And I will use most of the work that we have been doing with some of the colleagues and as a part of occupational health only. And we'll also provide evidence of what I'm talking to you at every stage of when I talk to you. Uh, so we looked at the current scenario of occupational health workforce in India. This was the publication a couple of years back, which focuses mostly on understanding the need and supply gap in terms of an occupational health manpower, which was published in Toxicology and Industrial Health. Uh, we looked at the estimates which are available from the Ministry of Labor, and of course, these are the estimates when paper was published a couple of years back. The total workforce in organized sector we estimated to be around 27 million. And we also looked at the total registered factories which are operational and the total workforce which are engaged in these operational factories. And we found that close to 7,000 and 2,300 respectively factory medical officers and safety officers are working in this country, which translates to, if you actually estimate, one factory medical officers for 1,600 plus workers and one safety officer plus close to 4,800 workers. So that's the existing scenario when we talk about it. So we derived some estimates looking at and using the Indian Factories Act regulations, and we estimated based on the current ratio for the total population in organized sector, and we considered that 27 million total workforce in organized sector, and we are not talking about the informal and unorganized sector here. So the requirements of the factory medical officers in India stands to 17,000, and the occupational health nurses and dress rehearsal compounders required for the workforce based on that again is the same, because as per the Indian Factories Act that we use the same number. Safety officers required for this workforce based on the existing ratio translates to 5,600. So estimating the deficit of around 58% of the factory medical officers and 59% of the safety officers based on the current ratio of employment. I'm not talking about the occupational health physician as such, because when you talk about even the competencies for a factory medical officer and an occupational health physician and different categories, even the occupational health nursing, the hygienist would be variable. But this is what is the need and demand, and we'll talk about that paradox subsequently. But what is the supply side? We tried to understand that what is the supply. We did mapping of some occupational health courses in India and tried to understand from where these people are coming who work as part of the system. Uh, if you look at focusing mostly on the basic occupational health services and looking at the consideration of an occupational health manpower. We undertook the systematic reviews and we found that there are around 21 institutions in India which produces around 460 specialists. That's a training capacity available every year. And obviously, looking at these numbers of 58% deficit, and in that relationship, if you look at absolutely inadequate training capacity, and there's a need demand paradox. And why I'm saying need demand paradox is that, on one hand, we say that we need people trained in occupational health. But where are the positions also matters because we all know that how the recruitments are happening and how the industries play around. And against this background, there remains always a need demand paradox of actually the need of the people trained in occupational health and actual number of people who are working in the setup. So we also looked at occupational health nursing and we titled our paper as Does Occupational Health Nursing Exist in India? Because where are the formal programs in that context? And there was another paper in that context where we looked at the occupational health nursing courses in India from the stakeholders' perspective, who are the clients of that. So these are the two papers which summarizes that we all recognize that occupational health services is a team delivery. As an occupational health team needs to deliver on that and occupational important member of the occupational health team remains an occupational health nurse. But there are hardly any courses in this country where the focused courses on occupational health nursing have been developed. We need to develop courses because currently we don't have programs. The nursing professionals are trained in occupational health either hands-on with some training workshops that are being conducted, but we don't have very systematic, strategic, conscious effort in this country to build actually and create the portfolio of occupational health nursing. And of course, supply gap in occupational health nurses in India remains very critical. The third paper that, the third aspects of that is, again, we looked at the situational analysis of industrial hygienists in India. And we found that there's a need of trained occupational health manpower, again, industrial hygienist. There are currently no norms available for industrial hygienists as per the Indian Factories Act. But if you use the norms of the safety officer, which the stakeholders actually agreed on, you would require 5,400 plus industrial hygienists in the country. But there are only 3 institutions which offers courses in industrial hygiene, and out of which 2 are the distance learning programs. And distance learning programs will always have their own limitations. So we need to strengthen the capacity in industrial hygiene. So that's one of the important area that probably we need to look at. Sorry, it's I think hanged. Yeah, I think the computer was hanged. I will reopen and apologies for that. Okay, so back on track. However, numbers are critical and important. We understand country like India, we need numbers. But if you look at the curriculum of existing programs, not only the Associate Fellow of Industrial Health, the certificate program, but also looking at the curriculum as a part of our MBBS graduation, also looking at the MD Community Medicine, which significantly covers occupational health, DIH courses. Even now, 40 plus institutions in this country offer MPH programs, and we also looked at the occupational health content of these MPH programs, and that remains a critical aspect basically. If we look at the overall curriculum, very fragmented reflection of occupational health, and that to a 20th century occupational health. We are in 21st century actually. We need to think about it that how do we actually incorporate occupational health for the 21st century as a part of the programs. And the reason for that is very evident and clear is that there is hardly any engagement of the stakeholders. The curriculum of academic institutions is designed and developed by the professors like us. and there's hardly any interaction with the industry people in that context. And therefore, I would say that for IOH and the occupational health physicians needs to play an important role in also participating in design the curriculum for occupational health. What we need for the 21st century is the multidisciplinary approach towards the curriculum. It cannot be in isolation and fragmentation. It completely needs to be overwhelmed in the context of multidisciplinarity is concerned. And using the competency frameworks, we'll talk about what competencies means because there is hardly any mention. Even the recently Medical Council of India for MBBS and even the postgraduate level curriculum deliberated on competencies, but these competencies are evolved again through the textbook. The systematic process of evolving as a bottoms-up approach, that competencies is not clearly reflected, that we'll talk about it. And therefore I wanted to quote here that if you do not know where you are going, any road will get you there. Because unless you know what competency you expect your graduates to have, based on which, because we expect, suppose as an factory medical officer or the industrial physician or occupational health physician or industrial hygienist, you are supposed to deliver on certain tasks. So delivering on those tasks, what are the competencies that a person should have? That's more important than saying that this is what is the curriculum. We train the people as a part of the curriculum and then they will go back and then on work they imbibe those competencies. That's not going to work. The content and focus of the academic programs is poor response to the newer paradigms that I mentioned, that we need to see that many people are saying, and it's quite well reflected actually. If you look at the occupational profile of last century, or why last century actually, maybe 1970 to 2000, last 30, 40 years, and next 30 years, a complete change in occupational profile. And if the profile of occupations is changing over the period of time, obviously the skills and competencies and knowledge required and desired to deal with those occupational health problems would certainly be changed. So that's the context. Health systems connectivity and community-based education, again, more holistic and occupational health looks at, and even looking at the teaching learning process. So then, coming to the second part of my talk about what and why competency-driven approach. I'm mentioning that it's important and critical that we talk about competencies, but why it's so. What competency is all about? The Lancet Commission on the Health Professional Education came out in 2010, a few years back, recommendations on reforms in health professional education globally. And I consider occupational health training as a part of the overall health professional education, both cross-cutting in terms of medicine and public health. And in that relationship, what competence is defined as being capable or ability? Because I'm supposed to perform some process. I'm supposed to deliver on certain task as an occupational health physician. Do I have not only the knowledge and skills, but attitude and behavior towards that to actually engage and deliver on that task through a problem-solving mechanism? Specific range of therefore skills, knowledge, ability in any specific form. That's actually is the competence is all about. And how competence is related to the performance. Because finally what we expect is, as occupational health physician, we need to perform our duties. So performance is linked to competence. And how it is linked up is, it is important to make distinction between two aspects. One is competence and performance in the sense that knowledge and skills a professional possesses. As a profession, I possess certain knowledge and skills. So that's my competence. I'm able to do certain things. That's my competence. However, demonstration of this knowledge and skills that I actually have possessed in actual situation, in life situation, in problem solving situation is what is the performance. So where actually I'm able to deliver and perform that, so that's the performance is, and so we need to see that how we bridge the gap between that competence and performance. And then comes to the competencies. What does it mean? It's an integrated application of some important components of that knowledge, skills, values, experience, the contacts, external knowledge resources, and tools to solve a problem or to perform an activity. That's what is the competency. And the competency should not be theoretically and driven by the curriculum, but should be driven by actual job responsibilities. You are supposed to do certain things. So we need to actually see that if as an occupational health physician, I am supposed to deliver on these tasks, then to deliver these tasks, do I have the sufficient knowledge and skills and behavior and attitude to handle that? So that's what actually needs to be looked at. And therefore we say that there are four major components of competency. One is knowledge. that understanding acquired through the learning that we all know, skills, capabilities acquired through practice, actually performing certain things, then personal attributes, and then finally the behavior. The behavior would be reflected through an observational demonstration of some competency or skill or personal attitude or the knowledge of an individual. So these are the four important components of an competency. Then we say that I have a competency of doing certain things. So do I have these four important aspects which deals with that particular competency? And that translates then to, if for any training program, if you look at the AFH program or our MBBS or MD curriculum also, if we wanted to have the competency-based education, it moves from teacher-focused to students and or workplace-focused. That shift is critical and important when we talk about the competency-based education. And it is absolutely related to the outcomes, because the whole focus of competency-based education is on outcomes that are linked to the workforce needs. As I'm supposed to do certain things. So for doing that thing, performing that thing, do have the competence of and actually being able to do that. So that's the context here. Unfortunately, this is the 30-70 paradox that exists, and several of you would agree to this. What we teach and the way we teach. If 30% of what we teach is redundant, then 70% of way we teach is redundant. The way the courses are being conducted in the country, if you look at the educational courses, I'm talking about training courses, and this is for health professional education, and I don't see any exception for an occupational health training also, that if 30% of what we teach is redundant, because I am saying that we are moving from 20th century to 21st century, and the whole curriculum and syllabus for the occupational health needs to be changed, but in that context, the way it is delivered also, because lecturing was one thing which was practiced in medical schools. Nowadays, knowledge is available at the tip of the fingers. You know, we are telling certain things to the students, and they know that, you know, just on their cell phone, they will tick, 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 and they will find it out certain things, or any other thing that you talk about. You talk about pre-placement examination, periodic examination, undergraduate students. So the information is not an issue. There is an information explosion. What is more important is that beyond that, and therefore we'll talk about even moving from informative to formative and formative to the transformative education. That remains the critical, and for that you need innovative pedagogy tools and techniques to be used. So that also relates to one of the important aspects of the competencies. And one of the issues that I wanted to highlight is a mismatch, the mismatch between the present professional competencies and requirements of increasingly demanding job responsibilities of the occupational health professionals. Because two groups don't talk. That's the problem. At times, the academic group and the practitioners group, there is hardly an interaction and or engagement. Why not to have even the practitioners of occupational health teaching into the programs? Why not have an academic institution engage with the industry through the projects and internships and students being fostered? So there is a much more interaction happening. So that's unfortunately lacking, and the competency-driven learning focuses on that and brings that aspect very clearly. And this is what is the conceptual learning model when you talk about the competencies in any field, including an occupational health. The foundation remains with the traits and characteristics that we all bring. And then subsequently through a learning experience, we develop the learning process where our skills, abilities, and knowledge is incorporated. And then through integrated learning experience, we acquire those skills and knowledge and abilities where we say that we have acquired the competencies. And finally, when we demonstrate and when we actually translate this competence into a performance through demonstration, that would also help us to facilitate the assessment of the performance. So that's the standard model that is being used. A couple of slides, but then to just differentiate between the traditional way of actually education and training that is happening versus the future of education and training if we wanted to really focus on competency driven. Because there's an argument also where if you look at some of the recent discussions around competency frameworks, people are not even willing to say competency based, they're competency driven. Whole education should be driven by the competency. It should not be only based, it should be driven. So that's a point that I am trying to make here. Where knowledge, we all know that in standard way, in traditional way, that knowledge is static and consider that finite and linear and private, but the knowledge is dynamic, open-ended, multidimensional is one of the aspects. Learning is instructive, where we talk about concepts that are acquired, built and modified as a part of the future. Similarly, teacher as a guide, where we compare as a teacher as on the stage, as in performing solo, giving lectures. So that's not the story. Assessment is based on the reproduction of facts, that we ask them, tell engineering measures to prevent occupational diseases, or tell some legislative measures which are available, and tell me the parameters or the components of the Factories Act and Mines Act, so those kind of things, then based on analytical, synthetic, and more personal development skills, core critical. I will come to those competencies which are required for today's occupational physician, and that you need analytical skills. You don't need that these are 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. What we need is that how to search for information is more important than knowing information, because the information is rapidly changing. So you need those skills of actually finding the information. Curriculum also is more historical, but what we want as an outbased curriculum as a part of the competence-driven agenda. Quality assurance is paper exercise, but an ongoing process of personal, professional, organizational learning is a part of the future education that we talk about. And same is the difference in the context of evaluation, which is focused on the learners focused than the teacher centric. That's what is critical and important. But what kind of competencies? Generally, if you look at the degree of expertise, there could be some basic competencies that everybody should know, obviously. In basic occupational health services are concerned, there are certain intermediate level, high level of competencies, and advanced level of the competencies. People also classify as core versus optional competencies. Core should be included as part of the credit courses. Optional is useful but may not be essential in that context. But these are the various classifications that have been used for the competency frameworks are concerned. But now, having understood the importance and need of competencies and competency-based, competency-driven education, let's talk about competency-driven approach in the field of an occupational health. Changing scenario, we all know that newer occupations, emerging occupational challenges, and as I mentioned that the several occupations will disappear in 21st century. There will new occupations would come up. Even transition is visible today also. And in that context, we need to see that the curriculum that we had designed or has been in place and practiced for last 30 years, is it not important that we revisit that and then see that we are able to create and build those competencies in our graduates, that they possess those competencies and then perform subsequently. Rising trends of burden of occupational diseases and conditions that I should not be telling this group. The role of occupational health professional, therefore, has also becoming more demanding. It's the role that occupational health physician played in the 30 years back and today has completely changed, and there are much more holistic approaches which are critical and important for the occupational health physician. And therefore, we need not only the trained but a competent occupational health workforce, which remains critical for the country. And therefore, a thorough and authoritative re-examination of our occupational health professional education remains an important aspect and priority for all of us. And we need to redesign occupational health training, therefore, and revisit, and we need to actually re-articulate the whole gamut of occupational health training is concerned, so that we can incorporate 21st century competencies in occupational health scenario. And this is the Lancet Commission recommendation that I talked about for the health professional education. Why competency-driven approach in occupational health, and that for that matter, health professional education? If you remember, the previous century, the early part of the previous century, I would say, the focus was on science-based curriculum. Occupational health or health as such, and medicine and public health evolved as a science. So the focus was on science-based curriculum. Mid-century, around 1960s, we moved from the science-based curriculum to the problem-based instructional innovations as a part of the curriculum, where we're talking about what is the problem. I need to solve the problem. And to solve that problem, what are the skills and competencies I should have so that I would be comprehensively able to actually deal with that particular problem. So that has moved to the problem-based instructions, and that was the first generation reforms that had happened, were early part as a science-based. Second generation reforms were related to the problem-based solving, and the third generation reforms that currently are being talked about at the beginning of this century relates to the transformative learning. And transformative learning is not only that having the competencies to perform, but creating change agents, leadership attributes, management skills, research skills, much more widely adapted skills, so that he or she is a perfect occupational health physician that we create. So moving from this informative to formative and formative to the transformative remains at the heart of the transformative learning. Informative means the whole focus of informative learning is transfer of information. that I know certain things and I tell you. That's the transfer of information. That's informative. Formative means socializing values and moral and ethics around that. That we as an industry, we as an occupation industry, we deal with the people. We can't deal with them in isolation. They comes from a larger gamut of the family as part of an organization. So we actually relate with the values, ethics and morals, in addition to the information. So that was the formative learning. But we need to move further forward as a transformative learning where we create change agents, where they are enlightened, they have leadership skills to demonstrate and practice in the field of an occupational health. So that movement is critical and important. And therefore I say that transforming the architecture of curriculum of occupational health courses, we need to adapt the core professional competencies to improve the professional overall performance of occupational health services. We also need to see that engaging in critical reasoning, because our analytical skills, if you look at, particularly in the field of medicine, they have been very restrictive. There is hardly any component of actually build on that. Our skills are more memorizing things and informative and, and then practice-oriented skills. But it's critical that we engage in critical reasoning and ethical conduct so that they are competent to participate in worker-centered occupational health system. Because now occupational health has evolved as a system for that matter, and they are a part of the team. The occupational health physicians are the part of the team, and so building those team skills is also critical and important in order to locally be responsive and globally connected teams in that context. In occupational health also, you need to be connected globally. What's happening in other parts of the globe? How do we imbibe those things and bring into a practice that we do? This will provide a new professionalism, because we talk about as a part of the profession, because ours is a profession. So actually that will help us to promote a new professionalism that uses competencies as objective criteria and develops common set of values around social accountability. Because social accountability would always remain at the heart in this century, because the issues of ethics, justice, equity would reflect it very clearly, because the world is moving towards that. Occupational health is not exception to that also, for that matter. We looked at some, this is the recently published paper last year only, where we looked at the occupational health training needs in India in the context of the competency-driven approach. And we found that the set of the competencies to be proposed by the occupational health practitioners. And we looked at for the medical graduates, medical postgraduates as a part of the MD community medicine and preventive and social medicine program, and MPH graduates. I will not go all in details of these competencies, but there are several lists available. So this is one example that I quoted, but you have another examples also. But what I'm saying is that it is not only copy paste and use of these competencies remains critical. What we need to see that we have to evolve our own competencies to respond to our own problems. And in that context we will deliberate further on actually. And I would like to also re-emphasize that these core and cross-cutting competencies, not getting into the discussion of that, but for today's occupational health physician, we need leadership competencies, we need management competencies, we need that how he is managing his time, we need how he is managing his stress, how he is managing his teams. It is important. Communication skills are underscored. Verbal communication and written communication are the critical skills and competencies for the 21st century. You have to engage in communication all the time. You talk to the patients, you talk to the workers, you talk to the management, you talk to the community, you talk to the peers. Everywhere communication skills remains critical. So when we talk about the overall competencies, technical competencies are critical and important. As a factory medical officer, we need that all clinical skills should be there. There is no question about it. But over and above those clinical skills, over and above those basic occupational health skills, we also need to understand that skills like communication, management, leadership remains critical. Community and cultural orientation also remains critical. Professionalism and ethics, critical analysis, advocacy for that matter. We need, and why only we talk about practitioners? In the field of, I always had a debate discussion with some of the colleagues where I mentioned that the focus of occupational health in this country had remained on the practice of occupational health. We need to create thought leaders in occupational health. We need to create thought leaders, and creating those thought leaders, because they would do the advocacy. The question that would come to a mind that when you are talking about the whole competency driven approach to the education, but who will do this? So we need people who actually are the advocates of the occupational health, who are proactively engaging with the DG Fastly and Ministry of Labor and academic institutions and association and so that we need thought leaders. And therefore, when we talk about thought leaders, even we need PhD programs, we need MPH programs in specialization. Why only that AFIH 3 month certification would be sufficient? Basically, we need much more stronger programs, the programs which offer much more stronger offering in the field of an occupational health, which is updated. So thought leaders is critical, and these competencies remains critical. Even the research skills, for that matter, they remain very critical. Because unless you have that research attitude and aptitude to look at the problems at your workplace, would not be able to respond to those problems. So those skills are critical and important. Last couple of slides. So the process of development of competency frameworks remains therefore the critical. What we recommend is the bottoms-up approach. And what's that bottoms-up approach is, let's look at what is existing. Let's look at the frameworks which are available. We publish some frameworks, but there are other frameworks also which are available. So let's look at how we can adapt those frameworks to our circumstances. Then engage in consultative process, engage with the stakeholders. We do not believe, I do not recommend any curriculum creation unless you talk to the practitioners. We always, when I sit in Medical Council of India, we say that you professors, we professors, as in ivory tower hospitals and medical colleges, talk to the people what is required. Even the MBBS graduate, the way the MBBS graduates that we produce, and when they go to the general practice or primary health center, the kind of work they do is a huge mismatch basically. We have cases of mitral prolapse and mitral venosis as part of the our medicine, internal medicine, but we don't talk about the snake bite when they goes to the field and then deal with the cases of that. So we need to see actually what are the skills required, and that's consultative process. Engaging with the stakeholders remains the critical. Focus on job responsibilities. What are my responsibilities? What are my roles, and what are the functions that I'm supposed to do? And for delivering those functions, then what are the cross-cutting professional competencies that I need? And therefore, reconfiguration of curriculum is also important from the contents point of view. Emphasis on innovative pedagogy, focus on transformative learning, and thereby we will be able to create 21st century occupational health professionals. That's the only way to deal with. We'll have to actually, engage in this complete reforms agenda for training in occupational health. And obviously, that also needs revisions. That competencies which are said generally have limited lifespans because the field is changing rapidly. The models that we adopt needs to be also re-examined over a period of time, and also it is recommended that the models revisit. But unfortunately, we have not been able to do it past, but future we should be actually doing into that also. So that is the story of competencies in the context of an occupational health, and some of these thoughts in relationship to the competency